Well, g'day, Max here again. Welcome back to the shop. So, we're going to do a bit of a video on the SHAPER machine. Being as this out of all my machines, this is probably the machine with the least amount of work that needs doing for it to be in a state that I've gone right through it and am happy with it. So what I'm going to do is put a collection of clips together. This repair will take place over quite a substantial piece of time, but as I do each inspection or repair or whatever it needs, I'll just record the clips and tack it all together into one video. So where I'm at the moment, I noticed a little bit of play in the ram, which is here. So rather than just adjust it up, I just opted to remove the ram so I can give all the slideways an inspection and just see the general state of the nation. So we'll bring you down and we'll have a look. So if you're a regular viewer, you'll remember the first cuts we done on the SHAPER. Now this was a long time ago, and this is part of another set of angle plates that I'm making. This is my smaller set, and we were getting these weird lines about where that texture line is. You can sort of, some weird lines running through, and wasn't sure. I just thought there's some play in this machine somewhere, so we need to go through it. So that's what we're going to start the process. So the actual ram itself is quite reasonable. There's minimal wear in it. It's still in good working condition. I'll just have to, when I lift it up, I'll have a look underneath. As for the slideways itself, there is wear, but it's still quite reasonable. And of course the other side. So yeah, there is slight wear. This is probably the worst of it here. And the difference between where the gib strips, well, the wedge assembly sits there, and the most worn section there is barely perceptible by the finger. So I do want to give the insides a good flush out with some kerosene, just to get all the gunk out. It all builds up in there over a period of time, and I'll drain the oil out and we'll put some fresh oil in. So one thing that has always sort of bothered me and sort of prompted me a bit quicker to do this, on this side here, I've always noticed the oil that comes out seems very black compared to the other side. Now it did have these rubber wipers, just a sort of a bit of a scraper really, just to keep the oil from running out everywhere else it's not supposed to run. So whether the rubber has something to do with that, I will be replacing those with felt. So I'll get the oil draining. We've got a drain valve down there, and I'll get all of this inside cleaned out with the kerosene gun and bring you back when we're clean. So we've cleaned up all of the top ways and that. Now when the wedge strip sits in here, previously it had been, that's what all that gunk was, that's elastic, and I believe the previous owners had some issues with oil coming out of it, because the oil system, the way it's fed up from underneath through this hole, and there's drillings, and that's the other oil port there. But when you adjust this gib strip up or whatever, that oil port there becomes open, so the oil is going to pool up here. Now what it looks to me like is that's the remnants of a little extension tube that appears to be broken off. So that tube, I think, should stick through and poke down inside that hole a little bit. So that's what we're going to try and repair, and that should eliminate the need for any of this elastic. around here. So she's all nice and clean in there now, as clean as we can get it anyway, so all ready for some new oil. It's amazing how much crap actually ends up in there, but bear in mind too, they're a pretty open unit of SHAPER. So you've got a big gap under here, and likewise at the rear, so it's something that really needs a regular clean out every time you change the oil. Right, so we can get the oil back in now. So sometimes I've found it very tight to adjust this stroke on this machine in some positions. So if we have a look at our cranking arm here, see how that's elevated, there's a gap between there. So as it sits right now, there should not be that gap. That should be free to slide, which it is free on there. But when we look at this arrangement here, we're hanging, the arm is hanging on the slide block here. So someone has over adjusted this slide block. So what we need to do is slacken off these two nuts, and it's a wedge, and we need to withdraw the wedge further back. Probably we'll go half the distance of those existing match marks, because this should not be hanging jammed in that. That'll lead to big dramas, so I'm very glad I have not actually used this machine too much. So let's get that adjusted first. So yeah, I'll just slacken off these nuts and move this wedge back a bit till we get correct clearance in here, which will be minimalistic clearance, but we don't want it excessive, so this clunks around. We don't want it tight like this. So I'll slacken off these two bolts, and then the arm should just drop down onto that piece of timber that I've got there. That's the plan. Interesting to note, all the all the threads I've come across on this machine, they're all quarter Whitworth. The old quarter Whitworth 5/16 British standard spanner, and it also sounds like the hoons are out. I'll slacken that, and I'll give this a tap down. I'll have to get a punch and just give that a tap down. I'll come in from the other side, give it a whack. There it goes. Yeah, so that was way too tight. Let me just, I might actually just take that all the way out and check it for damage. No, it all looks good. Still see all of the scraping marks on it. I'll just put a bit of oil down. Actually, I might take that block out. We'll just do a bit of an inspection. More Whitworth, 5/16 Whitworth or 3/8 British standard for this one. Okay, that's a strange arrangement. Thrust washer. So the rear of the bearing, still got all our scrape marks. I'll give this a wipe off. A little bit of minor scoring on the pin. Nothing to, you know, that's too detrimental. It's been running like that for a long time. It's going to run like that for a long time yet. Okay. Adjuster gears all look good. So our bearing block looks alright. A few marks in the bearing there, but that's to be expected from that shaft, but there's nothing too serious there. Right, we'll get this back together. This also gets, this oil comes down from up the top. I'll show you when this is back together to lubricate this. Throw a bit on our bearing as well. Wedge bearing, whatever you want to call it. Get him back in place. All right, I've got the camera in the way. I'll get this bolted back up and bring you back. Yeah, well, that was a bit of a mission getting those bolts in. Okay, so if I zoom you in a bit, we'll see these match marks. Just there and there. It's two match marks. They look like they're from the factory. So before we pulled it apart, the mark here was way above the mark here. So I'm just pushing this up with my fingers. And I can just go a fraction past it. So if I just bring it back, because it wants a bit of clearance, this thing, but not too much that it clunks, you know. I'm just going to put light, I only put a light finger pressure on it. So it's nowhere near as tight as what it was. So we'll nip there. Bolts back up. We should be able to, yeah, so we can still move it. You've got to have oil clearance in there. I can't rock it sideways. So I think we're in a good spot there. Way better than what it was. Tighten these down. Okay. Put our thrust bearing back in. Break out the old Whitworth spanner. Had a viewer give me a heap of these Whitworth spanners with a heap of other tooling, and by heck, they come in handy working on this thing. Okay, so we're free. No excessive side play. So I think we're good there. The other issue I had, and the other issue may all of a sudden go away now because it could have been caused by this being tight, was the stroke adjuster. We'll get this in the other position. I'll show you what was happening. So the other issue we need to have a look at is on this stroke adjuster. So this gear drives the nut that's in here to operate this screw, and it adjusts the position, the center position of the crank pin, that being the crank pin. So the further you screw this, your handle, your stroke adjuster, it operates this nut, which is in here, alters the position of this rod, and therefore changes the center distance between the center of the ball gear, which is here, this is the ball gear, and this crank pin. So the further it's away from center, the longer the stroke. Wind this all the way back, this thread goes all the way through, starts coming out here. This crank pin then comes closer to the center of the ball gear, and that shortens your stroke. So I'll zoom you in, you can look at the play. Now it's not play between the lead screw and the nut in here, it's play in this gear assembly, which can be adjusted by these lock nuts. So if I wiggle the crank arm, you may see some play there. I'll zoom it in more. See that little bit of play? So we're at maximum stroke. Now if I wind this to minimum stroke, it should have no bearing on that. But what's happening it is that play reduces. So to find out what's going on there. So when I go back to minimum stroke, that play disappears. All I'm picking up now is a little play in our crank pin bearing. So just got to figure out what's the cause of that. Why is that? So I had originally thought it was possibly something to do with this when this was jamming up, but it's still doing it. So we know it's nothing to do with the thread and the nut. There's something out of alignment. So what I may do is I'll try slacking off these bolts, wind it back, well, wind the arm back, slacken off these bolts in case just needs a bit better alignment, because what I want to do is take some of this play out. We can't do it with it when it's tight and it's minimum stroke position. So I just tried to slacken off these 4 bolts and wind the stroke adjuster back to see if it would relocate that. It is doweled, so I doubt it would do anything. So it didn't really do much, so it's still tight in that position. So what I'm thinking now, this here is an adjustable guide for this slide here. So if this is slightly tight, when all this closes up, that could be the only other thing that I can think of that would put a bit of loading on the shaft to make it start to bind in here. So what I'm going to do, I'll slacken off these 3 bolts. There's a match mark. It's just there, just out of eye view for you guys, or you might see the edge of it. There's a match mark there, and I'm going to slacken these bolts off, and I'm just going to give it a slight tap in that direction there, and just see if it just gives us well, we only need the tiniest bit of clearance, more so down this end here. Once we get this bush free in this, then we can adjust up this nut to take up the free play. Okay, that's a lot better. We can be able to see the play that we got there now. We're on minimum stroke and it's not binding up like it was. Okay, so what I had to do is play around with this adjuster. So what this does, it's on slotted holes, and as this slide here wears, you can slide this along to take up the wear. And because there's no real wear in here, it was on its maximum distance adjustment. So that means the only way this can move is to take up adjustment, but we're already tight. So on the dovetail underneath, I just had to relieve out a little bit with a file just to provide that little bit more clearance. It just seemed tight down this end, so it's looking like something just a couple of thou out of parallel between this bottom dovetail and the combination of this, either this tapered dovetail or the top of the ball gear where it slides against. So anyway, we've cured that. So what we can do now is make our adjustment on this nut. So we undo the lock tab, undo that, crack off that lock nut, and do this one up a little bit, and then retighten that one, and that'll take that bit of play out, which is evident here. Yeah, not quite enough room, a bit awkward to get in there with a C-spanner. So that's taken that play out. Hopefully we can still turn it. A little tight spot in it. Just back that off a tad. It's got it. And hammer in one of the lock tabs. That's it, job done. So we go to maximum stroke, and our clunking's gone. Bring it down to minimum. That all feels good. Okay. So with those combined faults, mainly the one where the slipper block goes into the arm, I was wondering too why sometimes it was very difficult for me to operate the manual hand wheel to manually move the stroke. So it was because that slipper block was binding was the main culprit. So what's left now? We need to check the oiling system. So we'll put some oil in, we'll check the oiling system, and then we'll get the ram back on. So she's all nice and clean in there now, as clean as we can get it anyway, so all ready for some new oil. It's amazing how much crap actually ends up in there, but bear in mind too, they're a pretty open unit of SHAPER, so you've got a big gap under here and likewise at the rear, so it's something that really needs a regular clean out every time you change the oil. So we've cleaned up all of the top ways and that. Now when the wedge strip sits in here, previously it had been, that's what all that gunk was, that's elastic, and I believe the previous owners had some issues with oil coming out of it, because the oil system, the way it's fed up from underneath through this hole, and there's drillings, and that's the other oil port there. But when you adjust this gib strip up or whatever, that oil port there becomes open, so the oil is going to pool up here. Now what it looks to me like is that's the remnants of a little extension tube that appears to be broken off. So that tube, I think, should stick through and poke down inside that hole a little bit. So that's what we're going to try and repair, and that should eliminate the need for any of this elastic around here. Right, so we've got our mesh screen back in place and we are full of oil. So to test this oil system, we'll fire it up. I've got the shaper set on minimum stroke, and when it's on, well, we have to run the ram or the arm, otherwise the oil pump's not going to drive, as all these gears have to be turning. Down there, that's the drive for the pump. So engage the clutch. And now the pump's running. Okay, so we're getting oil to ball gear and the ball gear pinion. We're getting it up here to this top link. But we're not getting it to either of the slideways. There's nothing coming up here, so of these two ports here are the ones that supply the slideways. There's nothing at all coming out of this one, and there's the faintest little dribble coming out of this one. So I'll check these valves out. If this is some sort of an adjuster, we might be able to adjust them up a bit to get a bit of oil flow happening. Okay, I've just adjusted those two oil ports, or the regulators. We're getting some oil out there now, so I'll connect the pipes up and we should get it up top here. Okay, that's good. We're getting oil flow out of our galleries up here now. So that was just a simple adjustment of the metering valves down there, and getting oil flow up to the top. So this oil here runs down the side, get something to run down, and into, there's a hole underneath that pivot, and what that does in turn, it dribbles oil down onto our bearing block in there. So yeah, that's all of the oil system all running as it should do. So now we'll look at getting the ram back in. Well, actually, yeah, we'll have to get the ram back in, and then we'll have to work out what we're going to do as far as this broken oil tube. Okay, so we've had an interesting development with our side oiling port here, which supplies the oil through to the other section of the dovetail, or the adjustable gib. What I found, what I thought was a tube that was supposed to go there, and it looked like it had been snapped off, is actually this fitting here. Now this screws in from the other side and screws through. So it looks like it's been purposely cut on a 45-degree angle, not broken as I'd previously thought. So what we're going to do, we'll get the ram back in. Once the ram's in, then we can set that other section of the dovetail in and investigate how far through this has to go. And that should alleviate, hopefully, the issues the previous owners had with the oil coming up here. Yeah, we'll just do that and see how we go. This gear is for the altering the position of the ram, so I'll get this back on. Just put a bit of grease on the gear and the shaft. Just sits in like that. Okay. Right, I'll get the ram slung up and we'll get that back into position. Give everything a good liberal coating of oil. Give it a fighting chance. It's actually a bit of a jiggle to get this ram in position because it's sort of got to go in at an angle and down. So we'll see how we go. Problem is this stud that comes up for the stroke positioning. So I'll get all this lock in place on the top here first before I take the slings off. Hate to turn around and see the ram slowly working its way out the machine. Right, so I think I've sorted out the mystery of why they had all Celastic behind here. So here's the oil port which links to the main feed port, which is this vertical one. Now inside has this threaded piece cut at 45 with a hole in the middle. It goes all the way through to let the oil through. So this was originally sticking out about there. The tip of that was barely protruding past that. Therefore, in that position, that would block off 90% of the oil flow available to get through that fitting. Now, this fitting has to protrude through at least that far, because this is its mating slide, and that's the hole, the oil gallery, that's the feed port. Okay, so down in there, that acts like a reservoir, and there is a little tiny hole in the bottom of that port, which is that one there to feed the gallery. So when this is in its position like that, that screwed piece I just showed you screws into the hair as far as it'll go in, and that way the oil will go down and feed that port. Anything left over will just slowly overflow down the sides down here and back into the edges of the flatway, which is fine. We shouldn't have any problems with it overflowing, coming, bubbling up and coming out of there. So that was the main issue. So when I go to screw this in as far as it needs to go, and that is to clear the oil port there and to enter into the pocket on the other part that we just shown. This needs to go something like that. That way our oil port is clear and it gets full flow of oil out of that tube or that jet into the pocket. So that's all that had to be done to solve that, hopefully. So we'll back this off. We'll drop our other half of the dovetail in and see how we go. That should go in like that. Then we can wind that little threaded tube jet all the way in till it clears here. Should be about there. So there's a blanking grub screw goes in here and here, so I'll get those in. I'll get these bolts in and then we'll nip up the adjusting screws. So we can nip down our slideway now. And with those plugs, you don't want to screw them in too far because you could run the risk of blocking off the oil way. So all I do with them is put a bit of pipe sealant around them and screw them in just till they're flush with the outside of the casting. That way there's no chance of them being screwed in too far and blocking off the cross port. So just very lightly, I'm just going to give these a little nip down. And I'm nipping them down lightly because when we start to adjust these other adjusters to push this piece in, we don't want it hitting the dovetail on the ram and lifting, and therefore when we go to do our final nip down on these, it'll squash back down and we'll lose our clearance. So we're still nice and free. I'll go through the whole stroke. Okay, so I'll just bring these adjusters in till they just touch. Okay, so what I'll set up an indicator on the ram so I can wiggle the ram and just check the play as we're adjusting these up. So if I wiggle the ram, push on the ram, we've got about 1/8 thou. So we'll just check out, we're going to do the same thing down the other end. So I've got about 6 thou down this end and we had about 8 thou up that end. So let me reduce this in half. We've got about 2 thou there, so I'll let that go and we'll come back up and recheck the other end. I just set up another indicator on this end just to save me juggling them back. So we've got about 7.5, 8 thou this end, so let's bring that down to about 3. Yeah, we'll give that a wiggle. Still wiggling on 3 there. So I'll just go back and recheck the opposite end. Just using aluminium so it doesn't damage where I'm pushing on the edge of the V-way. So we're still at 2, so nothing's changed there, so we'll tighten this front one up another thou. Give it another wiggle. I'm battling to move that at all. Just wonder if we're still... We're still nice and free. Just for that short bit of movement. Bugger all movement in that, so that's reading half a thou. I'll just back this adjuster off and I'll just put it finger tight. These middle two, finger tight, finger tight. Back this one off. Finger tight. So I'll give these lock nuts nip. Okay, we're still free, so okay, what I'm going to do, I don't want to go any tighter than that. We could possibly come up another thou at the back here for the time being. I want to run the machine and let this all settle in before we do a final adjustment. So we've got a job to do in the shaper now, so I'll get this, I'll get the way wipers back on and we'll run it for this job and then we'll readjust or recheck the adjustment. You just don't want it too tight that it starts to pick up. You don't want it too loose. We don't want it to be like a bloody, the old proverbial cock in a shirt sleeve either, so that's the plan. So before I put the wipers on front and the catch tray on the rear, let's check our oiling on this ram. So I'll run it for a sec. So we're getting oil out there. Oil out there. Out there. Coming through on that one there. Get my torch. And everything's getting the oil. Centre pin's getting the oil. Slide's getting the oil. Yeah. So we're all good. Okay, so after running it for a while, we're getting a little bit of oil pooling up on top here where that cross tube goes over. So the reason why the last people that put this together put Celastic behind this was to try and get around that. So obviously we have the little stub tube in its correct location now, but the volume of oil coming out of that cross tube is greater than what can be received on the other side of the way. So I don't want to do this elastic thing again. What I've got is a piece of aluminium shim stock, which is a neat fit in the gap. Zoom in. So what I'm going to try, so there's our oil port going through there. So I'll put this shim stock in, push it down, and see if that's enough to deflect the oil. What I will do is I will put a little touch of sealant on this just to stop it, because this is about 2 thou thinner than the groove that's in there. I'll just put a very light smear of sealant on it and drop that in. And what I'm hoping is the oil that tries to come up can't. It'll hit this strip and just run along the strip and hopefully migrate back down into the bottom of the dovetail way. That's the plan, so we'll try it. Camera won't focus. We have the tiniest bead of sealant on both sides, and there's no way it can have any detrimental effect on blocking up the oil way because of that short cross tube. But we set this back in place. Let that cure. Now we know we may have a further adjustment with this plate. That's not going to be any more than maybe 1 or 2 thousandths of an inch. So it shouldn't affect the bonding just here. I'll just tap this down. It's a bit better. Okay, we'll let that cure, and if it all works, it's a much more professional job than covering the whole thing in elastic. So we'll see what happens. It'll either work or it'll leak. So I made up a proper gasket for the rear drain. This goes underneath the ram at the rear of the machine and catches the runoff oil, and it runs back into the sump in the main casting. This had Celastic on it, but yeah, I'm not a real fan of Celastic. I mean, it does have its uses, and quite often it is a good last resort fix, but as a rule myself, I only use it when absolutely necessary. Right, that's the rear oil drain in place with its proper gasket made of cork. Okay, let's look at the wipers at the front. And actually, before we do the wipers, yeah, we've got to put this, there's another drain goes in underneath here. So I'd say we're going to do the same thing. I'll make a cork gasket and install that drain. So I've just given it a final check on the side play with the ram in this position here, and we're getting 2 thousandths of an inch there. So I am not going to go any tighter than that and I'll, like I said, we'll run the machine and then we'll recheck it. You've got to have that oil clearance, otherwise you're going to get scoring and things binding up. So she's still nice and free, but with 2 thou oil clearance. That's pretty well like a thou either side. So anyway, I'll wind this ram back and we'll have a look at this setup underneath here. So we've substituted that rubber with a piece of felt. So the felt runs on the underside of the ram just as a scraper to scrape the oil back. The excess oil comes down and goes into this pocket, and there's a little hole there, and it returns back into the main casting. And yeah, this tray just catches anything in between. So as you can see, yeah, they're pretty open, and that's straight down into the main casting where the oil reservoir is, but that's just how they are. Or how this one is anyway. And we don't have all oil pissing out here anymore either since we put that strip in. So that's cured that. That's been a good repair, that. So that's a bonus too. Well, okay, that was a repair that was long overdue to be done. It was just lucky last Monday we had a power outage. The power company was working on the lines on the street, and we had no power for a day, so it was a perfect opportunity to slip in and get the ram and these other minor issues sorted out with our shaper. We still have to we are going to be removing all of the table and this assembly here to go through that, and then we've got to make its proper base. But they'll be in future videos, so I'm just doing bits at a time with this one. So all that's left now is a few test cuts. So we happen to have a set of V-blocks from our shop-made tooling, the V-blocks, that are ready to go and have the sides machined in the shaper. So in the part 2 of the shop-made tooling, the V-blocks, you'll see, which will be the next video, you'll see the shaper in action. So anyway, cheers, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.